The ANSi scene, a little-known computer art underworld which rose to prominence in the early 1990s during the time of dial-up modems and bulletin board systems, known as BBSs. These systems operated independently from one another and were hosted on individual personal computers which were reached directly through the telephone lines. They were accessed through password and clearance from the computer's owner, so private underground subcultures were able to manifest in many forms that are no longer possible with the surveillance embedded into the way the internet is now accessed. ANSi and BBSs were both rendered obsolete with the rise of the World Wide Web and the increased speed capacity of data transfer, leading to what we now call the dot-com boom. Hundreds of thousands of artworks were made to be displayed on BBSs, with only a tiny fraction still surviving. ANSi art was just one of the major losses in the mid-1990s during this first massive-scale purge of technological civilization's cultural output, an action that the tech industry survives on, which we have seen repeated over and over with the perpetual updates, obsolescence, and replacement from one platform, application, or device to the next. The physical spaces of the Silicon Valley itself changed drastically during this period as well. Initially an agricultural area, much of the working and lower class populations had to flee because of rising costs and increased policing, a process that has been repeated in many cities of America as the tech industry continues to grow. ANSi was a text-based form which allowed color graphics within the MS-DOS operating system. The artwork was typically constructed out of rectangular and square blocks, displaying 80 characters wide and 25 high at a time. 16 colors and 4 shades of density were available for each block. These were placed into a text grid, one at a time using the keyboard. The arrow keys were used to navigate, and the mouse could be used for minimal copy and paste functions. Graphics could take days, weeks, even months to create, as artists began finding ways to stitch multiple screens together into long scrolling artworks. The rise of the ANSi scene was facilitated most directly by the underground of teenagers already in place, illegally pirating software, known more commonly as wares. In the 1980s, kids' appetites for computer games outweighed their budgets, and they began sharing them with one another. Software companies quickly wised up, embedding various forms of copyright protection into the programming so that only the original purchaser could access the software. Hackers became fluent in the programming languages games were coded in, and found elaborate ways to crack these protections. Pirate groups were formed all over the world, and a massive-scale competition began with groups racing to crack and distribute a new game under their banner before their rival groups could. Elite became the blanket term to describe the underground of hackers, pirates, anarchists, and crackers using computers. There were elite BBSs and elite users. The general population of computer users was referred to as PD, or public domain, or the more derogatory term, lamers. The users of early large-scale online providers like CompuServe, Prodigy, and America Online, or even those who used the smaller multi-line chat BBSs, were thought of as squares and disregarded completely by the elite counterculture. Elite users seem to be a direct carryover from the original anti-authoritarian, free information, utopian ideologies that had spawned much of the personal computer revolution itself, where the PD users felt more like that period's version of a basic consumer class. By the 1990s, a common way of declaring an elite affiliation would be when a group had all capital letters except a lowercase I. Much of the language and spelling permutations developed by the elite scene are still found in common internet usage. The vernacular of computer slang itself is likely rooted in the earliest generations of elite users, who were able to communicate with each other freely across a much larger geographic span than the PD computer users, who were often relegated to using local BBSs in their own area code. Great measures were taken by Warez groups to get software and games before anyone else, at times before they were even released. The term zero-day wares became a popular tagline, meaning brand new wares that had just been released that same day. The group that cracked a piece of software would insert a sort of digital graffiti into the intro that would display when it was loaded, claiming responsibility as a sort of brag right. These intro screens, also known as crackdros, quickly became more and more elaborate, coding in graphics and music while trying to simultaneously take up as little disk space as possible. 1 megabyte of data was still something that took a huge amount of time to transfer over a phone line, and a floppy disk could only store 1.44 megabytes at a time. As the intros became a form of art all unto itself, some groups started to release these graphics without a game at all. This became known as a demo, and the demo scene began. Massive demo-making parties would occur all over the world, where coders would meet and compete at writing demos over the course of a weekend. The demo scene spawned many advancements in computer graphics. Warez groups continued to release nearly every piece of new software to hit the market, from games to operating systems. Warez were able to spread throughout North America and all over the world in a matter of hours. And to explain this, one must go even further back, because the proliferation of both ANSi and Warez can be tied to the phone phreaks of the 1960s. Phone phreaking was an activity reportedly started by a subculture of blind kids. Using sounds, they would emulate the tones used by the phone system to steal long-distance calls. Some had perfect pitch and could whistle these tones with their own mouth, and others found ways to build low-tech devices which could create these tones. The most famous phreaker of all time was John Draper, otherwise known as Captain Crunch. He discovered that a toy whistle packaged in boxes of Captain Crunch cereal emitted a tone at precisely the same frequency that AT&T long-distance lines used to make a new call, 2600 hertz. This exploration of the phone system became the prototype of hacking, and many other ways of stealing phone calls continued to be developed. While ANSIs were being made for virtually every BBS in North America, it was the Warez BBSs where the ANSi scene first surfaced. ANSi groups, similar to the Warez groups, began to spring up, creating graphic interfaces for pirate boards. first was supposedly a group called AAA, followed by Acid, Ice, and many others. In addition to the actual artists creating graphics, groups would have various other members and a chain of command. Senior staff would be in charge of operations. Coders, who would program custom interfaces and applications to look at the ANSIs, which normally came with each pack. And typically a division of couriers who were in charge of distributing the packs to BBSs all over the country affiliated with the group. The top groups often had members who specialized in providing its other members with PDX numbers to get free long-distance calls, setting up dummy 1-800 numbers to member BBSs so they could be called toll-free, and providing multi-line teleconferences so people could talk at once. And lastly, accumulating stolen credit card numbers used for a variety of purposes, including the Unix accounts that members could use to access early forms of internet relay chat and FTP sites for file sharing. The illicit nature of pirated software, as well as the demographic of the artist, primarily, if not exclusively, smart, antisocial teenage boys, heavily dictated the common aesthetics being aggregated from the pop culture of the era. The most common graphics were evil-looking scenes reminiscent of death metal album covers or J.R.R. Tolkien and Dungeons & Dragons styled fantasy scenes. Slick, gangster-like crime graphics often appeared as well. This was still a time when people good with computers were primarily nerds, escapists spanning from the classic pocket protector archetype to the beret, jungle boot, and trench coat clad stoner, or just the weird kid that always wore sweatpants and read mech warrior sci-fi books in the back of the classroom and turned out to be able to type 80 words per minute with only his 2 index fingers. What we now know to be machines you can simply take out of a box, press an on button, and be told what to do in a series of simple pictures and commands in order to access the far spans of the world within minutes is a very different scenario than the all-black screen that required elaborate command strings to perform even the simplest action. The elaborate possibilities of personal computing on a PC still relied heavily on DOS. Microsoft Windows 3.0 and 3.1 still mostly just felt like a way to play solitaire with a mouse or trip out on psychedelic screensaver patterns and flying toasters. Macs were just something your mom's uncool friend accidentally got talked into buying by someone at a store. To become an expert at navigating a computer required day-in, day-out dedication, and waiting for the machine to actually process and perform most of the tasks seemed to take even longer. Only the most obsessive, patient, and inquisitive personality types thrived in these conditions, and hopefully they had a good chair. The ANSi groups began assembling monthly packs of the artwork they had made, each one being created custom for an elite BBS. The packs then became advertisements for the boards, displaying their Warez group affiliations so that you could know what files you might be able to find there and what users you might be able to talk to on the message boards. The artists in the groups would take on a 2-letter abbreviation of their handle in order to fit in the character capacity of a file name in those days. In a list of the contents of a pack, you could know who did which ANSi before loading it, based on its 2-letter prefix. If the phone number of the board was not listed, it normally had an area code, so you could try to find ones that were local to you. Every major city in America had them. It would be common to see the line no ratios for LD callers, which meant long-distance callers did not have to upload files in order to download them. In those days, though, even a single area code might cover a massive span of geography and carry long-distance tolls. Every kid got in trouble for the phone bill at least once. But the commonality of hacked 1-800 numbers linked to good BBSs, sometimes without any knowledge of the sysop at all, allowed those who were not active phreakers themselves to access long-distance boards regularly. Not unlike the teenage subway graffiti art scene of New York in the 1970s, ANSi Art's teenagers quickly began pulling most of their imagery directly out of comic books of the day. Instead of graffiti's obsession with artists like Von Baudet, Ralph Bakshi, or Frank Frazetta, it was characters like Spawn, the Max, and Pitt. As the ANSi scene grew larger, like the demo scene, it started to become more autonomous from the Warez scene. More and more BBSs started popping up which only hosted ANSi art packs in their download areas. Hundreds and hundreds of groups were formed, many releasing only 1 or 2 packs, if a pack at all, before its more talented members were drafted to a more established group. Acid and Ice remain the talented mainstays and biggest rivals throughout the entire duration of the scene, thanks to heavy recruitment of artists from the smaller groups. But many other groups, such as Fire, Union, CIA, Tribe, and Blade, all had a strong presence as well for years, and had artists producing work on the level with work coming from Acid and Ice. Unlike a youth art subculture like graffiti, where physical interaction often occurs and therefore an underlying thread of violence and warring dominates much of its ontology, ANSi was occurring remotely, so elaborate forms of criticism were able to develop. Slews of electronic magazines would be created monthly, with well-known artists from the ANSi scene rating the individual art pieces in each pack, and often declaring an overall winner from each month. These would also include articles about the scene and interviews with its legendary artists. Both the ANSi scene and the work it created became increasingly self-reflexive. Artists began experimenting with techniques for image construction specific to the possibilities of ANSi itself. Prominent trends and application techniques for shading arose. the equivalent of artistic movements, which could entail any number of things. Funk, for example, was a text trend started by artists like Minor Threat, Mass Delusion, and most famously the font artist Hannibal Lecter from Acid, who switched to Ice under the handle MCA. Funk, in its inception, was likely inspired by Parliament Funkadelic. It involved absurd neon-like complementary color combinations and a heavy dose of irony. Narcotic was often credited with making goop and a sort of digital blur popular. Eerie, also known as 33, used a sort of crude, muddled abstraction of forms, almost echoing principles found in the bad painting movement. This was a very exaggerated extension of the heavy black stipple style used famously by the acid artist known as Lord Jazz. Last but not least, the toon artists, in the expedience of their shading style, or lack of shading at all, allowed artists like Jed and Toon Goon to have some of the most prolific output in the history of the scene. A combination of the techniques from these trends and the full embrace of the low-resolution color block as a possibility for abstraction and expression, rather than simply a limitation for illustrative realism, led to aesthetics which had not been seen before in other art forms. Many of the trends in ANSi's history are also related to specific features of the changing software used to create the ANSIs. As ANSi switched to longer and longer scrolling graphics in order to achieve the details necessary to replicate a shaded comic book picture, Acid created its own ANSi drawing program called Acid Draw, adding a feature that allowed you to make ANSIs as many lines long as you wanted, with a zoom out so one could actually see the proportions of a multi-screen drawing all at once. By 1995, the ANSi scene was in communication largely through internet relay chat in the Acid Room. BBSs became less and less necessary for the communication aspect that kept the scene thriving. Without BBSs to display work, ANSIs no longer had any practical application other than the art packs themselves. BBSs went in heavy decline with the rise of the internet. As the modems got faster throughout the course of the ANSi scene, graduating from 2400 to 9600 to 14.4 to 28.8, by the time it got to 56K, connections were finally fast enough to transfer a photographic interface through the internet and facilitate a fully functional World Wide Web. Plenty of the ANSi groups also had VGA graphics in their packs, and many of those VGA artists joined the ranks of the first generation of web designers, HTML coders, and domain name hoarders. Some hardcore ANSi artists still continued to release packs for one another and push the limits of the colored block. But overall, the ANSi component of art packs became more and more sparse. As derelict, lonely teenage boys often do, they go off to college, get their first job, or get their first girlfriend, and no longer have the time to contribute the amount of dedication ANSi required. Or they just switched over to AOL chat rooms in hopes of actually getting their first girlfriend, like me.